Okay, so this is the 1 billionth time I have filmed this, because the first time I filmed this, the clip went missing and I have no idea where it is. Apple has a lawsuit coming for them, and I just refilmed it like 2 seconds ago. That one was accompanied by really loud fan noises, so it was like wind was blowing into the microphone, and I'm intermittently being walked in on by my family. And that is a very peculiar and acute type of shame, where you're sitting in front of a camera talking to it and surrounded by books. Okay, so this is the last time I'm filming this. If I have to film this again, that's it. I'm quitting YouTube. There's only so many times my ego can take being walked in on while talking to a camera about books. Okay, so let's start again. So I think I know this off by heart now. I read 9 books in November. A lot of them were rereads and short stories because I wanted to finish my Goodreads reading challenge for no apparent reason other than I wanted to. I had to double check this was filming because I swear to God. And a lot of them were short stories, and I marked them off as being whole books. And I refuse to feel bad about that because I feel like short stories should be considered as like whole individual stories and not like read straight through as a collection, even though a lot of effort probably went into collating that collection. It just makes more sense to consider the object by itself. And if being behind on my Goodreads reading challenge makes me read more short stories, that's a good thing, because I should be reading more short stories anyway, because read widely of different genres, blah blah blah. Okay, the first thing I read in November was a reread of The Drover's Wife, the play, which is a retelling of the Henry Lawson short story. And I read this the previous month as well, and I wanted to reread it after reading the Lawson short story to see how that would change things. You don't need to read the Lawson short story to read the play, but it's interesting to see the way she manipulates the source material. Because this is a reread, I will link where I first mentioned it down below, because there will probably be more thoughts and probably I will be less agitated in that video. But I gave it 3 stars. And the next thing I read was The Forest of Silence, which is the first book in the Del Toro Quest series. I was going to reread this whole series because it would bump up my Goodreads reading challenge real quick, but then Shoei, Lucy and I decided to do a reread of this series this year because everything always comes back to Emily Rodda. So yes, I'm looking forward to that. But this is a middle grade series set in this fantasy land where the monarchy has been overthrown by this magic, evil, tyrannical shadow lord, and our protagonist, a 16-year-old Leaf, needs to go around the country, Del Toro, and collect all these different magic gems so that they can give it to their heir of the monarchy and he can reclaim his throne. It's really good. Emily Rodda is a really clever writer. I don't particularly like the first half of this book because it's the fall of the monarchy. Good guys lose and the bad guys win, and that upsets me for no apparent reason. I only gave this 4 stars. I will save more thoughts the reread when I reread this, and maybe I will vlog it because that's in vogue at the moment. The next thing I read was also a reread, and it was The Sellout by Beatty, and this is a satire about race in America. This was one of my top reads of 2017, and because it's a reread, I will link where I first mentioned it. And you may notice, or you may not notice, but I notice I'm sort of reluctant to say too much about this and put forward too much my understandings of it, because I am a white person and I'm not even an American white person. So there's only so much I feel like I should say, or rather so much I feel comfortable saying on the internet with my own face in front of it, which I have mixed feelings about because I find stay in your lane culture wholly unproductive. So if you have any thoughts on that, hit me up. It interests me. But yes, it is spectacular. It's really funny, but also really hard-hitting and deals with some serious topics. Beatty is also a phenomenal writer, and you can really see the craft that goes into his writing. So 5 stars, would really recommend it. And the next thing I read, I know this off by heart now, I don't even need to look at my Goodreads. The next thing I read was another reread of one of my 2017 favourites, a poem by George Oppen of Being Numerous, which is about existing and being in the world and relationality. It is transcendent. I would really, again, recommend listening to George Oppen reading the poem himself, because he brings across such a weary fragility to the poem. And again, I will link where I first mentioned this poem down below. And it's just wonderful, and he creates such a tenuous, fragile reality, and I would like to sit down with like the physical version of this and just annotate it, because the techniques are wonderful and I would really recommend. And I read 3 short stories by Adichie, and they are from the collection That Thing Around Your Neck, or That Thing Around Your Neck, I'm pretty sure it is. And the first one is Cell 1, and it's set in Nigeria, in this university college town, because the young woman lives with her family on campus because her dad's a professor, and her brother gets into some trouble with gangs and the law. And it's just really about the patriarchy and how that functions through the family. And there's a real contrast between the brother and sister and the way the family relates to each of them. I had to move because I kept getting overheard and walked in on, and my fragile ego could not take that. Thus the dramatic drop in both lighting and quality. But, you know, no one comes here for quality. Where was I? Oh yes. And the next short story was a private experience in which 2 women hide in the same place as there is a riot happening in the streets between 2 different religious groups, and these 2 women sort of represent each side of the divide between religions, and they sort of overcome their differences. Our protagonist really comes to see and realize her own privilege through talking to the other less privileged woman, and it's really interesting the way that comes out, because it manifests as a sort of, this type of thing doesn't happen to me, this wasn't supposed to happen to me, which I think is a perspective that I often sort of internalize. Like, you see suffering and tragedy and it's something that happens elsewhere and not to you or those that you know. So that was really interesting. I gave that 3 stars. And then the last one I read was Imitation, which I gave 4 stars, and it's about this Nigerian woman who marries a wealthy Nigerian man and moves to America and is surrounded by white Americans, and she finds out her husband is having an affair, and she sort of reflects on their marriage and her life as a transnational subject. And all of these stories are particularly interesting in my opinion because I find in media the black subject is often depicted as lower class, and their struggle for agency is intrinsically tied to their lower class, and obviously that's not the only way a black subject can be. So it's really good for me, I think, to read about a wealthy and privileged black subject and seeing the different ways that interacts. So that was interesting, and I feel good for me. Then the next thing I read was the first 2 books in the Legion trilogy, because I found out in my end of the year book tag that the last book in the series came out, so I thought I would reread the first 2 because they're not terribly long and I really enjoy them. I have a mixed relationship with Brandon Sanderson because I really love the Legion trilogy, but I read Steelheart, and the second one in that series, really hated it. It's just male fantasy and male wish fulfillment, and I've tried reading Mistborn like 3 different times, and I've gotten a couple chapters in, put it down, lost my spot, forgot about it. So if you know any Brandon Sanderson series that I like or as good as Legion, hit me up. But also, conversely, this means that if you have not had good luck with Brandon Sanderson in the past, maybe consider reading the Legion trilogy. And it is about this young man called Stephen who sees people and their sort of personifications of specific areas of expertise. So he sees a historian and a psychologist and a handwriting analyst. You get the gist. And he, with he calls them aspects, go around and solve mysteries. And it reads sort of like a procedural, like, crime drama, wherein in each book or in each episode you have a complete story that has been summed up nicely, but overarching all of that is another slower moving plot and character development. And I really enjoy that, and I really enjoy the characters, particularly the aspects, and seeing how they relate to the world. But anyways, the first story is about a camera that can allegedly take photos through time, and in the second story, Stephen and his aspects are trying to find the body of a man who has been working on how to encode data in DNA, and he encoded data in his own DNA, so they need that body. And it's just phenomenal, and I really love aspects, and that's what I read for, which makes going into the third book really stressful because there's a lot of foreshadowing that the aspects are becoming more unstable, and all I want for those aspects is for them to have a happy ending. But I did not read the last one in November, so cliffhanger for my opinion on the last one. Then finally, the last thing I read was another short story, which was The Beauties by Anton Chekhov, and I found this because I was looking for short stories because I wanted to read 50 books for my Goodreads reading challenge and I was behind. So basically I found this because I was looking at podcasts of famous authors reading their favourite short stories, and this was Philip Pullman's, who wrote his Dark Materials trilogy, and it is about this man at two different points in his life. He sees two beautiful women and he's sort of reflecting on the tragic ephemeral nature of their beauty and of beauty in general, and of that moment of him gazing upon the beauty and the sadness he has that he cannot like own or grasp the beauty. There's a lot happening here except for plot-wise, so it's much more interesting to analyse than it is to read because it is pretty light on plot. But I'm glad I read it and I gave it 3 stars. Okay, we finally got to the end, and the quality and the background of this is really not good, so please let me know actually if the camera quality and the background is particularly important to you, because if it is, I will try to wait for moments where I can get better lighting and not be overheard by my family and go through the 6 stages of mortification. But it just means that videos will have to be bulk filmed and probably will be less frequent than they currently already are. Please let me know. Yes. So that is it from me. Goodbye.